My name is Jaechun Kim. I'm a professor of international relations at Sogang University. I study U.S. foreign policy toward the Korean Peninsula. Well, traditionally, diplomacy was state affair between government to government. Diplomacy was conducted through government to government channel. It was basically an affair between diplomats. But in contemporary era, public diplomacy has become much more important. Why? Because it is the people who are making a great influence in one country's foreign policy making. So, in a nutshell, public diplomacy targets people in your diplomatic counterparts. You're not just targeting government officials in your diplomatic counterparts. Rather, you target people in your diplomatic counterparts. Why is that? Because, as I said before, people are very important. They are making a real influence in one country's foreign policy making. Why is that? I can think of two reasons. One is the spread of high-tech information technology, and the other is spread of democracy. With the advance of information technology, people get to know what's really going on in diplomatic affairs. I mean, you gain access to sensitive diplomatic information right away. With the SNS, you can really make a real impact in making foreign policy. And democracy means also you gain these institutional mechanisms with which you can control your country's foreign policy making. So for a number of reasons, people factor has become very important in making foreign policy. So that's why it is very important for one country to target diplomatic efforts to people, public, because public and public opinion has become increasingly important in making foreign policy. So I think it is very important to communicate with the public in your foreign counterparts rather than just talking through government to channel. So that's why public diplomacy has become very important. And then you asked what is the role of public diplomacy in South Korea-China relations. Our relationship has been improving since we normalized diplomatic relations in 1992, but the relationship between the two countries and the perception that we have toward each other is not at its best right now. And I think public diplomacy can play a certain role improving the relationship between the two countries. I think we have done a pretty decent job in trying to talk to people in China, in trying to win the hearts and minds of China's public. But that's until our decision to deploy THAAD, Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System in South Korea. Since then, the relationship has deteriorated. But initially, I think we did a pretty good job. I think President Park Geun-hye was quite well received by Chinese public. When former President Park Geun-hye went to China to attend World War II war ceremony, victory ceremony, Park Geun-hye was really hailed by Chinese public as Biao Da Jie, excuse my Chinese language. Biao Da Jie in Chinese language means Big Sister Park. She was hailed by China's public. But after THAAD, as I said before, the relations between the two countries deteriorated significantly. And I think that proves there is a work to be done. That proves our public diplomacy so far has been pretty okay, but it has reached its limits. That's my assessment. I mean, you asked the objective. The objective was to win the hearts and minds of Chinese people, and to be more specific, we'd like to elicit China's support for our policy toward North Korea. North Korea's nuclear weapons problems and our unification policy, and so on and so forth. I think there is a host of challenges that this new Moon Jae-in South Korean government is faced with. And if you ask me to pick one challenge, I will probably have to say that it's our policy toward North Korea. How to deal with North Korea's nuclear weapons problem is going to be the gravest challenge to this new government in South Korea. I think it's because of North Korea's nuclear weapons situation, the relationship between the two countries deteriorated. Our relationship has deteriorated because of our decision to deploy THAAD the objective which was to better deal with North Korea's nuclear weapon situation. And the hurdle here is this really a historical, not historical ill feeling, but the animosity and the ill feelings that we came to harbor toward each other after our decision to deploy THAAD. How can we deal with these, bad perceptions toward each other? I don't think there is a magic formula here to clear up these ill feelings. But as I said before, I think public diplomacy can play a certain role here. I mean, in terms of ameliorating the relationship between the two countries. Well, I think we'll have to make sure that the reason we are deploying THAAD has 100% to do with the North Korea's nuclear weapon situations. We're not trying to neutralize or doing damage to China's strategic interests. That's not what we are trying to do. We are faced with this grave challenge in North Korea, and we'll have to do what we'll have to do. And THAAD is clearly a defensive mechanism, defensive weapon, with which we can increase our deterrent and defensive capability against the North Korea. I think we have to do a better job in terms of persuading China. The THAAD issue has become really a hot potato between the two countries because, it's a mistake made by Park Geun-hye government. We presented THAAD as if it is a sign of goodwill between the two countries, when Park Geun-hye government should try to persuade the Chinese that this is something that we'll have to do in the future if North Korea is a threat, crosses a certain threshold. This is really something that we must do to deal with the situation, but we haven't done such a thing. But what we had done previously was to present this THAAD issue as if this is going to be a symbol of goodwill between the two countries. That was a mistake. What I'm going to discuss during my session is that we really have to diversify our public diplomacy efforts toward China. Why? Because so far, two countries, it's not just South Korea, but also China's efforts, public diplomacy efforts had been limited to top decision-making level. I mean, President Xi Jinping was at the forefront of China's public diplomacy efforts towards South Korea. Likewise, President Park Geun-hye was at the forefront of South Korea's public diplomacy efforts toward China. And it was quite successful, as a matter of fact, when President Xi Jinping came over to South Korea in, I think it was the year 2014, he visited Seoul National University, gave this special lecture, and it was really a remarkable success. His visit was really well received by Korea's mass media. Korea's public was very well received. And I think Park Geun-hye's visit to Beijing to attend that World War II victory ceremony was, as I said before, was remarkably successful in terms of improving South Korea's standing in China's public opinion. But I think it is about time for both countries to diversify channels of public diplomacy efforts to different channels, such as think tank channels or channels between different NGOs in both countries. I think that is the contention I will be making for my session, is that we will have to diversify our public diplomacy efforts toward each other. Why? Because previously the public diplomacy efforts had been limited to top decision-making level, and that has reached its limit. And I think Jeju Forum can play a positive role in improving the relationship between the two countries. Jeju Forum provides a number of avenues through which government officials and scholars, they get together and they talk about the ways in which they can improve the relationship, as to how they can instill trust in relations between two countries. I think in that sense, Jeju Forum is very, very important in terms of providing these avenues. And then think about the issues that Jeju Forum is covering. Jeju Forum is covering some of the hard issues that South Korea is faced with, such as North Korea's nuclear weapons problem, territorial disputes in South China Sea, and so on and so forth. But some other issues are really softer issues, what I would call softer, non-traditional security issues, such as environmental degradation, how we can deal with new types of epidemic, disaster reliefs, and so on and so forth. I think it is very important for Jeju Forum to continuously cover and then deal with these softer issues. Why? Because it is these venues through which you can easily cooperate, because these are easier issues. These are not really intractable hard security issues, such as North Korea's nuclear weapon situation or territorial disputes in South China Sea. Something that we can work on, and by working on these easier issues together, I think we can cultivate a habit of cooperation. We can accumulate a stock of trust toward each other. I think a Jeju Forum is important in terms of providing these avenues for these representatives of these countries to get together and to talk about how we can cooperate on these easier issues. And through these cooperation, I think we can move forward to discussion of how we can deal with harder issues. I think that's the right way to go. Oh, well, by watching Jeju Tube, I think by now you have a better understanding of what's going on in Jeju Forum. So stay tuned and thank you for watching.